Okay, so I really need this stuff explained. Today, Donald Trump and his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, are promising to unleash an unprecedented level of sanctions against Iran. And Bessent wrote in the Financial Times, quote, "Now we are entering the end game. At dawn begins an economic D-Day, the single greatest financial offensive ever marshaled against an adversary." What does that mean? Joining me now, Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia and an MS Now international affairs analyst, and retired four-star U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey, a decorated combat veteran in Vietnam and a former battlefield commander in the Persian Gulf. Susan Glasser still with us. Ambassador, we know that the president wants this war to end. Do you believe this is the answer or will be a very impactful tool?
I don't know. I want to be honest. I don't know. I don't know what the goal is. You just said to end the war. Have they said that? Is that what the goal is here? I thought the goal was to get rid of their nuclear weapons, to end support for terrorism, to open the Strait of Hormuz. And this is a principal problem first with this day, this D-Day, and that sanctions work best when we know what the explicit goal is. We don't know what that is. Number two, I just remind everybody, usually administrations work through their lists of measures to achieve an objective and end with war. Economic sanctions usually come before you get to war. This is the first time in history I can remember that the United States went to war first, military war, and then followed it up with economic sanctions and economic warfare. I can't think of a single moment in history. But number three, if it is going to work, it's all about China. This is the key play here. All the other countries don't matter as much as China. And we've seen before when we tried to use economic coercion against China, it hasn't worked. It doesn't mean it won't work this time, but we have not been that successful in the past.
Let's stay on that last point, or second to last point, though, General, because if normally it starts with economic pressure and it ends with war, now we're using economic pressure, and we've already made it clear the president does not want to restart attacks. So if the economic pressure doesn't work, where do they go from here? Where do they go from there?
Well, oddly, we're in this bizarre strategic disaster in the Gulf War. The military options now are basically gone. Iran is resilient. I think in retrospect, we're going to decide that the worst thing we did was the massive, surprise, brilliant decapitation of their political, theological, and military leadership at the start of this war. These people are angry. Iran is already an economic basket case. It's undergone severe restrictions on trade for 47 years. We're more likely to be a serious threat to Canada than to Iran in the coming days. So I think Mr. Trump's options are almost non-existent. The military tool is not going to work. And, I remind people that I took a division into the Persian Gulf and landed at the Saudi port of Adaman, unloaded 3,000 some odd armored vehicles. I don't think the U.S. military can operate in the coming years in the Persian Gulf, including the U.S. Navy, never mind container ships of U.S. military supplies. So we ended up with 6,000 Iranian drones and ballistic missiles being fired at U.S. bases in the region, and we intercepted 1,500. We're in a very serious dilemma right now dealing with Iran.
Can you just stay on that? Because you said over the weekend that you think that the U.S. has permanently lost access to 15 different bases in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, well, look, the numbers shift around, but we've got, to some extent, 40 U.S. military positions in the Middle East. A bunch of them are in the Persian Gulf. The central part of Army logistics was up north. The Navy was in Bahrain. The Air Force was in Al-Udd. They've now shifted that back, as I understand it, to Shah Air Force Base in the United States. One of the Navy's most effective logistics supply points was in Oman on the Arabian Sea side, which has also been struck multiple times by Iran. So the bottom line is, when you look at unclassified overhead satellite photography, the Iranians, using fairly cheap drones, managed to knock out the majority of our radar systems and comm systems and fixed installations They hit the Air Force Command and Control a good lick. We've had 700 some odd soldiers killed or wounded in the air defense units in particular in the Persian Gulf. So we just, this massive U.S. military force, which has devastated conventional Iranian power, is no longer contributing to forcing the nuclear program of Iran into an inspection regime that prevents it from going nukes. I would bet you 5 years from today, when we're having this conversation, Iran will be a nuclear power because of this situation.
My God. Susan, the president relied on the existing economic pressure to keep Iran in line in his first term. The fact that he's now pivoting to it now, what was the point of the war? Again, we've lost 18 American lives.
Well, I think the general has outlined here, the longer term consequences, which suggests that not only is there the short term loss of life, but there's a long term, really devastating potential blow to American geopolitical interests in the region. First of all, there's the question of why it is our partners in the Persian Gulf would continue to want to have American bases there in the region if rather than supplying security, we have become the security risk that they need to defend against. There's that. There's the question of the long term weaponization of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran, now that it's seen that perhaps even more than the possible threat of a nuclear program is the actual existence of its ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. It's very hard to see them agreeing in any kind of negotiation or with any kind of pressure that they would cede that. And I would just point out also, Steph, we're talking here about this idea, this very overheated language from the Treasury Secretary comparing himself to Hitler and Roosevelt in World War II. I mean, come on. I remember when America worked in concert with our allies to impose unprecedented economic pressure on Iran during the Obama administration. And that succeeded in part because there was an enormous campaign across the board. It wasn't just America acting alone. Secondly, we even had Russia participating in the effort to bring Iran to the table. And that resulted in the Iran nuclear deal, which, of course, Donald Trump pulled out of in his first term. And I think that was the precursor event to this basic destabilization of the American position in the Middle East, which we're now seeing as a consequence of Trump's very costly war of choice.